Hello, it is that time, story time with Uncle Scotty, and I am your host, Uncle Scotty. Hydration is important. Also important, washing your hands. These things we know, we've been talking about them every day for the past 6 weeks. But you know what? For the next 6 weeks, and the 6 weeks after that, and 6 weeks after that, and 6 weeks after that, it is always important to wash our hands because cleanliness is of the utmost importance. Hello, how are you doing? Thank you for sharing your time with me here at Storytime with Uncle Scotty. Thank you to everyone who's been joining us on Patreon. Hope some of you are receiving your bookmarks and or mugs. And I'm excited to come and tell some stories with you outside of this little box that we're in right now. I can't get out. Hello. Okay. This is good water. It's really good water. Okay. What have we been doing? That's right, reading stories. What story? Sideways stories. One story that's many stories. Sideways stories from Wayside School by Louis Char. Louis Char. When it's a door, not a door. When it's a jar. We're up to chapter 26 right now. Everything's fine. Everything is great. With me. I hope the same is with you. I hope so because you're here. And we're here together. And that makes me feel great. Whenever it needs to be great. Okay. Chapter 26. Terence. Terence was a good athlete, but a bad sport. Rondi and Allison were playing 2-square with a red ball. 2-square, like 4-square, but less. Red ball, really bouncy, I think. Can I play? Asked Terence. No, Allison replied. You have to let me play, Terence said. Louis says we have to share the balls. We're not sharing with you, said Allison. Oh, let him play, said Rondi. All right, said Allison. We'll play 3-square. You better play right. I will, said Terence. Allison bounced the ball to Rondi. Rondi bounced it over to Terence. Terence caught it and kicked it over the fence. You have to go get it, said Allison. Shut up, Dixie Cup, Terence answered. Now, that is language that we do not use. This is illustrative because Terence is a bad sport and not someone who is welcome to be around people. That's the only reason we're using that language here in the words of Louis Char. Not the words of Uncle Scotty. And I recommend not the words of you. Beep, Dixie Cup, Terence answered. Rondi ran and told Louis. DJ and Damien were playing basketball. Uh-oh, here comes Terence, said Damien. Hey, let me play, said Terence. Get lost, Terence, said Damien. You have to share the balls. Louis said so, said Terence. Okay, but just throw it in the basket. Don't kick it, said Damien. I won't, said Terence. First, Damien took a shot. It bounced off the backboard and through the hoop. Bank shot, he proudly called it. Next, DJ took a shot. He threw it underhand way up in the air. It came down through the hoop without touching the rim. Granny shot. Then Terence took a shot. He kicked it over the fence. You idiot, said Damien. Take a train, peanut brain, Terence answered. DJ went and told Louis. Stephen, Calvin, Joe, John, and Leslie were playing Spud. I think that's like tag. Everyone was it. I'm kind of sad that I don't know what all these games are, these playground games. I feel like maybe I was never included in any reindeer games. It's a different story. Stephen, Calvin, Joe, John, and Leslie were playing Spud. Stephen was it. Everyone else had a number. They're telling us how to play the game. Everyone else had a number. Stephen had to throw the ball up in the air and call out a number. The person who had that number had to try to catch it. That's a fun game. Can I play? Asked Terence. No, said Calvin. You'll just kick the ball over the fence. No, said Joe. No way, said John. No, said Leslie. Sure, said Stephen. Newcomers are it. He gave the ball to Terence. Just throw the ball up in the air and call out a number between 1 and 5. Okay, said Terence. The children formed a circle around Terence. 1,000,000, yelled Terence as he kicked the ball over the fence. What'd you do that for? Asked Stephen. Eat a frog, warthog, said Terence. Stephen ran and told Louis. Terence looked around. There's nothing to do. There were no balls left. Louis walked up to him. He was followed by Allison, Rondi, Damien, DJ, Stephen, Calvin, Joe, John, and Leslie. "What's the matter, Terence?" asked Louis. "There are no balls," said Terence. "Do you have a green ball?" "No," said Louis. "All my balls have mysteriously disappeared." "Darn it," said Terence. "There's nothing left to kick." "Nothing left to kick," said Louis. "Oh, I don't know about that. What do you think, Rondi? Is there anything left to kick?" Rondi thought a minute. Ding! Then she smiled. She was missing her 2 front teeth. "Yes, there is something left to kick," she said. "Well, where is it?" "Let me check with Allison," said Louis. "Allison, is there anything left to kick?" He winked at her. "There sure is," said Allison. "Well, what?" asked Terence. "How about you, Damien?" asked Louis. "Can you think of anything?" Damien nodded his head yes. "Well, what is it?" asked Terence. He couldn't wait. "DJ, we got anything around here to kick?" asked Louis. DJ smiled. He's got that big smile. Yes, we do," he said. "Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me," said Terence. Terence demanded. "I don't know if I should," said Louis. "What do you think, Calvin? Should I give it to him?" "I think you should," said Calvin. "You heard Calvin," said Terence. "Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me." "Not so fast," said Louis. "Leslie, should I give it to him?" "Ah, yes, I think he deserves it," said Leslie. "Give it to me, give 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 it to me," said Terence. "Do you also think he deserves it, Joe?" asked Louis. "Yes, I think so," said Joe. "What about you, John?" asked Louis. "Definitely give it to him," John answered. Come on, come on," said Terence. "Recess is almost over." "We'll leave it up to Stephen," said Louis. "Whatever he says goes. Whatever he says goes." "Let him have it," said Stephen. "You heard him, Louis," said Terence. "Let me have it." "Okay," said Louis. He picked up Terence and kicked him over the fence. That's what Terence deserves, because he's a good athlete and a bad sport. And there you can see Louis kicking Terence over the fence. Gotta collect those balls. Chapter 27, Joy. That's a sip of my water outside of my own mug. Chapter 27, Joy. You ever seen that movie Inside Out? It's good. I like Joy. Joy had forgotten her lunch at home. It was lunchtime. She was hungry. She didn't have a meal ticket. If she had a meal ticket, she could have had lunch from Miss Mush, the lunch teacher. She'd have to be terribly hungry to eat a lunch made by Miss Mush. Even an empty brown paper sack would taste better. But that's how hungry Joy was. Damien hadn't forgotten his lunch. He had brought a lovely turkey sandwich, a big piece of chocolate cake, and a crisp red apple. What a balanced meal, Damien. A sandwich, a large piece of cake, and an apple. Most of the food groups represented. All he needed was a glass of milk. He could get that from Miss Mush. Miss Mush didn't know how to ruin milk. Damien left his lunch on his desk and went to the end of the milk line. Joy didn't waste any time. She reached into Damien's sack and took out the apple. But then she spotted the turkey sandwich. She put back the apple, took the sandwich, and noticed the chocolate cake. She put back the sandwich and took out the cake. But then Joy had second thoughts. She put back the cake. Then she grabbed Damien's whole lunch. First, she ate the sandwich. It was in a baggie. When she finished the sandwich, she placed the baggie on Jason's desk. Ooh. Next, she ate the chocolate cake. It was wrapped in wax paper. She put the wax paper on Allison's desk. She ate the apple last. She placed the apple core on Dee Dee's desk. Then she put an empty sack on Calvin's desk. Damien returned with his glass of milk. "Miss Jules, my lunch is gone," he called. Poor Damien. Remember he had run up and down the stairs all the time, lost his pencil, couldn't figure out how to write his name on his pencil with his pencil. Now his lunch is gone. "I wonder where it could be," said Mrs. Jules. "Calvin took it," said Joy. "There's an empty sack on his desk." "Good work, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. "Calvin, I'm ashamed of you." She wrote Calvin's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. "Look, the baggie from Damien's turkey sandwich is on Jason's desk," Joy called. "Very good, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. But how did you know that Damien had a turkey sandwich? I'm just smart, said Joy. Mrs. Jules wrote Jason's name on the blackboard under Calvin's. Here you can see. This is Miss Jules. There's the very much talked about blackboard under the word discipline. Calvin, Jason, Mrs. Jules, somebody. And then there's Joy. She's got chocolate on her face, pointing around the room. And there's the wax paper from the delicious chocolate cake on Allison's desk, Joy announced. Joy had chocolate all around her lips, as we just saw in that illustration. Allison stood firm. She looked into Mrs. Jules' eyes. I didn't eat his cake, she said. The evidence is there on your desk, said Mrs. Jules. Joy spotted it. She wrote Allison's name under Jason's, on the blackboard under discipline. Damien's apple core is on Dee Dee's desk, said Joy. Very good, Joy, said Mrs. Jules. She wrote Dee Dee's name under Allison's on the blackboard under the word discipline. Damien, I think you ought to thank Joy, said Mrs. Jules. She solved the mystery. Thank you, Joy, said Damien. Just then, Louis, the yard teacher, walked in. I have your lunch, Joy, he said. Your mother brought it. You left it at home. You mean you didn't have a lunch? Asked Mrs. Jules. You must be very hungry. No, said Joy. Not really. Since Damien didn't get to eat, he can have it. Thanks a lot, said Damien. You're the greatest. He ate Joy's lunch, an old bologna sandwich, and a dried up carrot. Not so good. Joy, for being such a good detective and for being so generous with your lunch, you may help yourself to a Tootsie Roll Pop, said Mrs. Jules. They are in the coffee can on top of my desk. Joy took one. Then when Mrs. Jules wasn't looking, she took another. She took one. When Mrs. Jules wasn't looking, she took another. Calvin, Jason, Allison, and Dee Dee had their names on the blackboard under the word discipline, but they were good for the rest of the day, and so at 2 o'clock, Mrs. Jules erased them. They forgot all about the whole thing. Damien had a lousy lunch instead of a great lunch, but 5 minutes later, it didn't make any difference. He couldn't taste it anymore, and he was fine, and he was full. He went outside to play basketball and forgot about the whole thing. Joy had a great lunch and 2 Tootsie Pops. That's the sound of a great lunch. But 5 minutes later, it didn't make any difference. She couldn't taste it anymore, and she was full. And at dinner time, she was hungry just the same. But a horrible thing happened. Joy couldn't forget about stealing Damien's lunch. And for the rest of the year, every turkey sandwich, every piece of chocolate cake, every apple, and every Tootsie Roll Pop tasted like Mrs. Mush's porridge. And here we see a picture of Mrs. Mush's porridge. That doesn't look very appetizing at all. I think the lesson there is don't steal people's food. Don't lie. Don't blame people for things they didn't do. Don't frame people. Don't steal Tootsie Rolls out of coffee cans on teachers' desks. So very true. And that, my friends, has been Storytime with Uncle Scotty. We have 3 more chapters to go. And we'll be done with this book and we'll be on to our next book. We are romance, we are romance, we are romance. Check us out on Patreon if you would like. Thank you to our sponsor, Time, for always giving us the time that we need and not the time that we don't. And I will see you next time